We acknowledge the Tlingit, Haida, and Tsimshian people who have been stewards of the forests and waters of this land since time immemorial, and who continue that work today, and on whose land we each do our work and live our lives. We also want to thank all of those who have worked on raising awareness of this issue and who have contributed to making this town hall event a reality. Pacific Environment, Alaska Longline Fishermen's Association, Southeast Alaska Conservation Council, Alaska Community Action on Toxins, and 350 Juneau, as well as the JAC, KTOO, and Betsy Sims, Studio A, for providing technical support for this event. So what to expect tonight? The first panel will educate and inform on what heavy fuel oil is, some of the science and the issues, and the environmental impact and implications to our communities, industry, and traditional and customary harvesting practices. The second panel will dig more into solutions, legislative calls to action, and some overarching issues involving heavy fuels. So you can see our panelists. I'd like to invite our first group of panelists to the stage tonight. We're going to be giving short presentations. I have a bell here that I'll ring after about 4 minutes, so we can kind of keep on track. Our first group of panelists is Aaron Brakel, SEACC Clean Waters campaigner, Kay Brown, Pacific Environment Arctic Policies Director, Linda Bankin, Alaska Longline Fishermen's Association Executive Director, and Gloria Burns, Ketchikan Indian Community Tribal President. In addition to our hosts tonight, we want to acknowledge our tribal communities and their continued leadership and stewardship on this issue. The Yakutat Tlingit tribe, the organized village of Cake, the organized village of Kasan, and the Ketchikan Indian community have all passed resolutions calling for cleaner fuel use. Metlakatla Indian Community and the Skagway Traditional Council have taken up the issue as well and are looking at resolutions of their own. Also, we would like to acknowledge the community of Teneke for leading the effort at the municipal level. All right, panelists, thank you for being here, and I'll let you jump in. I think you've already decided your order, so I'll just set a little 4-minute timer and keep you on track. Thank you very much.
Right. Thank you. My name is Aaron Brakel. I'm with the Southeast Alaska Conservation Council. I had the good fortune of growing up here in Juneau and have watched the cruise industry grow along my lifetime. So why is heavy fuel being used? It's cheaper. And we've had an economic analysis done. It hasn't been released yet, but what we're looking at is about $3.50 per passenger day that they're putting into their pockets. So why focus on heavy fuel? Number one, because this is something we can make a difference on. It's a real problem, and there is a solution that we here in Alaska can move forward. So heavy fuel oil is made from the leftover junk of refining. It's the last thing to boil off in a refining distillation column, and it's full of metals and impurities and hydrocarbons. Long chain hydrocarbons that don't boil off at lighter weights. It's dirtiest and cheapest fossil fuel in use today, fuel oil. It's viscous and peanut butter-like at room temperature, sticky, black, tarry, and has to be heated in order to be pumped and moved about ships. Here in Southeast, it's almost exclusively used aboard the large cruise ships. But they also carry cleaner fuel, which they use in some places. And then in Southeast Alaska, these are the last year's 2024 track lines that we got from Marine Exchange of the vessels with open loop scrubbers that carry the heavy fuel oil here in Southeast. And then it's also important who doesn't use heavy fuel. Almost everyone, certainly you. Tugs and barges, the marine highway system, commercial fishing, and onshore power generation, they don't use this dirty heavy fuel. There are a lot of bans and restrictions around the world. You can't use it in Glacier Bay National Park according to the concession requirements, and not within 24 miles of the California coast. There are many bans and restrictions around the world on scrubber discharges, including recently announced ones in Sweden, Denmark, and Finland, and China has had a long-standing ban. If you use cleaner fuel, it avoids generating a lot of unnecessary pollution, including toxic scrubber wastewater, completely unnecessary, and increased glacier melting black carbon, which heats the air, and then when it lands on snow and ice, it darkens the snow and ice, melting it. And it also, using cleaner fuel, avoids additional particulate emissions, even though a scrubber is used. Using cleaner fuel also reduces the risk of persistent oil spills. This is a photo from Alaska, a heavy fuel oil spill in 2004. First off, of course, no oil spill is a good oil spill, but there are particular problems with heavy fuel spills. Remember what I said earlier about the properties of this residual fuel? It's viscous, black, and tarry. It's called a persistent oil if spilled. That means it doesn't readily evaporate or disperse. It mixes with water, emulsifies, expands, and tends to spread. It's hard to boom because it can often sink below the surface, and it can also travel long distances underwater. It acts by smothering shores, seafloor, and wildlife, and it can reappear and re-oil surfaces. Heavy fuel oil can only be used with an exhaust scrubber. Non-tank ships cannot even carry this stuff on board unless they have an exhaust scrubber. And scrubbers are alternative compliance to meeting sulfur emission targets. And they allow this dirty, high sulfur fuel to be burned. But scrubbers carry all kinds of pollutants. Scrubbers catch all kinds of pollutants, not just the sulfur. Scrubbers spray water through hot and toxic acidic exhaust from burning this heavy fuel. There's a large stainless chamber installed inside the exhaust tract with rings of nozzles, which they take and they spray the water, transferring pollutants from the air into the water from the exhaust. And most of the scrubbers worldwide, most of the ones here in Alaska, are open loop systems. That means they continuously pump very large volumes of clean, living seawater through the scrubber chambers. Sometimes these ships, some of these ships pump more than their entire volume over a trip to Alaska. And one of the things that really isn't talked about much in the question of scrubbers, they talk about discharge, but I encourage you all to think about what's in our water. It's full of living things. It's full of fish, it's full of microorganisms, it's full of plankton. If you pump it up, you're going to kill on the intake filter the larger organisms, and then when it's sprayed through the exhaust scrubber, I don't think anything is likely to survive in there. And these are very large volumes of water. Thank you. That's what I had there. I'll turn it over to Kay Brown.
Thank you, Aaron, and hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you. I'm Kay Brown. I work for Pacific Environment, and I work on ocean pollution and Arctic and Alaska issues. Let's go to the next slide. A huge body of work shows that scrubbers are, in fact, very detrimental to the marine environment, wildlife, and people's health. Aaron has mentioned what they call them EGCS, otherwise known as scrubbers, and what they're really doing is taking pollution out of the air and transferring it to the water, to the ocean. And that's going to have enormous impacts, potentially. Why do we have this? The International Maritime Organization that regulates global shipping a few years ago set a limit on how much sulfur could be in fuel, marine fuel. And as a result of that, the use of scrubbers has just skyrocketed globally from a few hundred to almost 5,000 now. And they lowered the amount of sulfur in fuel from 3.5% to 0.5%, except if you have a scrubber, you can keep using heavy fuel oil. It was an alternative backup because they weren't sure they were going to have enough clean fuel to meet the demand. But I think of it as an unintended consequence with very, very negative consequences that absolutely needs to be addressed. Let's go to the next slide. In response to EPA's assertion that they didn't have enough information to regulate scrubber discharges, Pacific Environment undertook a literature search, and we found 26 studies that had been done around the world by academics and other groups. And we documented that last August in a report, Ship Pollution from Air to Ocean, the Science on Why Scrubber Pollution is Harmful and Should be Banned. And then we followed that with another report in January summarizing additional studies that had been subsequently done, as well as an overview of the whole situation. So if you want to dive into these reports, they lay out the case for why something should be done and shine a light on what the industry wants us to ignore about this situation. Let's go to the next one. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, and this is a complex slide, but if you're looking for a one-page simple solution or a picture of the whole overview, this shows not only what the pollutants coming out are, which critters are affected, how the whole thing fits together and works. And you can find this illustration on the Clean Arctic Alliance website. Let's go to the next one. The big takeaway here is that scrubber pollution is toxic to marine life at very low concentrations. And a growing body of science indicates there's virtually no safe concentration level of untreated scrubber effluent that is negatively affecting organisms in the marine food chain. Scrubber discharges have large amounts of acidic wastewater and can increase the acidity of seawater around it when it's discharged, especially in places with high ship traffic like we have here in Southeast Alaska. This slide summarizes the reports that I just mentioned. Scrubber discharges contain harmful and persistent substances like polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, known as PAHs, nitrates, nitrites, and heavy metals. And studies found that concentrations of scrubber wastewater as low as 1/10,000th of 1%, a tiny, tiny amount, have toxic effects on marine life. Copepods, marine invertebrates, microplankton species suffer negative effects at multiple stages of their life cycles. And these are critical in the food chain for endangered species such as killer whales in Canada's southern seas. These toxic pollutants have been documented to cause cancer, affect neurological development in children, and lead to a host of other harmful effects on human health. Let's go to the next one. 15% of scrubber discharge worldwide is coming from cruise ships. And as Aaron mentioned, a large cruise ship can generate its own volume and discharge that into the ocean several times in the course of a one-week cruise. So envision a great big ship and that entire ship filled with wastewater multiple times being discharged into the ocean. We're talking huge volumes. We don't really know the exact amount, but unquestionably, it's a very significant and large amount. In Southeast Alaska's Inside Passage, cruise ships are the major source of scrubber discharge. All but 2 of the 1,000-plus passenger ships that visited Alaska in 2023 used heavy fuel oil and scrubbers. And as Aaron mentioned, these also carry cleaner fuel, so they presumably could be skipping back and forth, but since they're closed loop, they are continuously discharging this seawater that has these toxins in it. Cruise ships will make more than 3,000 port visits in Alaska this year, so there's a very large amount of traffic involved. All of these harms have been taken into account by ports and states and nations around the world. This map shows where bans and restrictions have already been put in place as of February 2023. And more could certainly be done. The International Maritime Organization has essentially ceded authority over this to local ports and regions and indicated that they don't have enough consensus to actually make a decision and do anything, although there are efforts underway to try to get them to do something. But we'd like to see Alaska follow the lead of all these other jurisdictions and do something now, which is the solution: burn cleaner fuel. Thank you. I'm going to now turn it over to Linda Binken with the Alaska Longline Fishermen's Association.
Not sure. Is this mic working okay? Yeah. Great. Well, thank you all for being here tonight. Linda Benkin. I am the Executive Director of Alaska Longline Fishermen's Association and President of the Board of Alaska Sustainable Fisheries Trust. I'm also a commercial fisherman and have been for 40 years. And most of the work of our organizations, maybe go to the next slide, is really focused around how do we keep our oceans and our fisheries and our fishing communities healthy. And I think what you've heard documents what the impact is as far as the health of the fish and the health of what you're eating. I wanted to also talk about how that affects commercial fisheries as a contributor to our economy. So Alpha is an organization of community-based fishermen who work by advocating for policies that keep our fisheries and our oceans healthy and sustainable, engage in collaborative research where we see a conservation issue or a management issue to try and address and resolve those challenges, and then also through education and outreach. Next slide. The Alaska Sustainable Fisheries Trust has a broader membership base, has a similar mission, also does more economic investment in the sustainability of our region. But again, really focused on keeping the resource healthy and keeping everyone who lives here able to benefit from having that healthy resource. Next slide. We started in over 14 years ago, the first community-supported fisheries program in Alaska. Some of you are probably familiar with CSAs, or community-supported agriculture programs, where our customers receive from us a box of frozen fish every month, sort of what's the catch of the month. We also do direct-to-consumer markets just with straight shipments all around the country. And our main goal in starting that program was, one, to make sure Alaskans had access to Alaskans fish, but also to build the connection between the people who enjoy Alaska seafood and the fishermen who are working hard to keep those resources healthy. And what we find across the board that really attracts people all across the country and in state to eating Alaska seafood is the recognition that Alaska has these pristine, clean water, this clean environment. And that's really what we market our seafood on. Next slide. And it's not just us who are marketing on that. This is looking at some of the marketing materials, a couple different ones pulled together, but from the Alaska Seafood Marketing Institute, who again are telling the story of the pristine waters, showing snow-capped mountains and glaciers and our beautiful, clean, pristine waters. It really is what is fundamental to marketing Alaska seafood and establishing it in the market. To have this information, to me, where we know sort of that dirty secret, I feel like we're being disingenuous by continuing to build our reputation on this. So to us, as a really important part of Southeast Alaska, Alaska's economy more generally, doing something about these dirty fuels just seems a responsibility, just a really deep responsibility. I wanted to talk about one other program that we run. It's a program of our Fisheries Trust. It's called the SEACC Report. And SEACC invites everybody to think about Southeast Alaska as a bank of natural capital. It's a bank that pays dividends every year in fish, in clean water, in forest products, and ecosystem services such as carbon sequestration, in monitoring the flow of water and preventing flooding. And it does all that as long as we take care of that natural capital, which is the health of the water, the health of the forests, and it does all that without having to spend anything. It provides those dividends, provides those services. And what the Sea Bank report does that we publish each year captures what that value is in terms of the economics and dollars. And it's really significant. I won't throw too many numbers at, but a few that come to the surface is commercial fishing in Southeast Alaska supports more than 10,000 jobs, has over $800 million per year in economic outputs, contribution to local communities, and that this resource as a whole depends on us doing our part to keep that resource and those fisheries healthy. It just, I guess, is something I hear repeatedly from ASME in their outreach as well, that marketing Alaska as these healthy waters, these pristine waters, is what sells fish wherever they go. And I will just end there, that to us it feels like a real mandate to burn clean fuels when you're in Alaska. And I'll turn it over to the next.
Hadalasis, Glunkings, ASD, Gooding Lagan, Dolores Churchill, Di Non Ul Ijing, Holly Churchill, Di Al Ul Ijing, Ils Hilestung Iskian, Gloria, Hinudikyang. Good people, it's an honor to be here with all of you this evening. I am the granddaughter of Dolores Churchill, the daughter of Holly. My name is Ils Hilestung, or Gloria, means the best kind of medicine with your voice. It's an honor to be here in the land of the Aquan and the Takuquan people, respectively. And I acknowledge that I am in the jurisdiction of both Tlingit and Haida and the Douglas Indian Association. I come from Ketchikan Indian community, and which is the traditional homelands of the Sonyaquan and the Tontaquan, respectively. I'm here just to really talk about traditional and customary usage or subsistence. I'll tell a little bit more of a story. I come from a family of weavers, and so you make the bulk of your money off tourism in the summertime, and then you have very little money to pay for anything in the winter. And in that time frame, you're going to completely subsist off the land to take care of your family. And that's how I grew up as a child, and so it wasn't uncommon to make a choice to pay for the lights and then spend the rest of the winter at the beach, digging clams, digging cockles. I'd say that even today in my life, in my household, 90% of the food that we eat comes from the ocean or from the land in general, with the exceptions being butter, bacon, celery, onions, potatoes, and carrots, right? And sugar. So really, those things that will enhance those foods that we're able to get from this land and these waters that we take care of. And so, we have signed, along with several other tribes, some resolutions, and we're incredibly concerned about this act of using these fuels that are harmful, because we're looking not just at what is happening to us right now, but when you have a low food consumption rate in the state of Alaska, and you know that you're eating way more fish than is leveled on there, and you know that the science says that these particular fuels have a higher rate of cancer, and you come from a family that every single woman in your family gets breast cancer, you really have to make those correlations and look at that. And if we're looking for 7 generations from now, which is what we have to do as tribes, we know that when everything else tanks, my people aren't going anywhere, then you have to think about what does that look like accumulatively. And right now, the tribe, Ketchikan Indian community, I can't speak for others, really feels as though this practice of fuel dumping makes the cruise ships an extractive industry compared to what we are getting back. And so I don't know how other people feel, but from a tribal perspective, we don't want to be the place that everybody continues to extract from. Where is the reciprocity? And in everything that we learn and everything that we do, we have a responsibility to the land, and the land and the waters has that responsibility to us. This beautiful state that we now call Alaska didn't spring out from nowhere. There were people here who lived here for millennia who took care of it in a way that we're all able to benefit from. And we have a responsibility to do the same, to make sure that in 7 generations from now, all of our descendants have the ability to say that the land and both our human and our non-human relatives are taken care of in such a way that we are the healthiest. We are we have all of those things that I think, whether or not you're Native Alaskan, Alaska Native, or you were several generations Alaska or just new to Alaska, we have this expectation of what it is to be from our state. And what is happening right now with these fuel systems is what it means practically is I haven't harvested clams or cockles in Ketchikan for at least 15 years. We haven't been able to on the beach. So, if you're looking at, we did a recent health survey that what did we say that that there was this that the median income of my tribal citizens, 6,600 and some odd citizens, I can't remember the number, was $30,000 yearly. That's how much the majority, and so those people are relying on the land to be taken care of and the ocean. And so I'd say that this is bigger than just the impacts to all of these different industries, but it is, when you're looking at a population that isn't going anywhere, that is going to have all these cancer situations, we have to figure out a way to do better and be better. And I don't understand why the industry, who has this great interest in making sure that that they can come here, isn't leading this, and why we're having to pull them to this. The industry should be coming to us and saying, we want to continue to do business here, and we're going to do better.
But what I'd like to do is just reflect on some of the conversations you all had in the room here during the break, and just maybe a couple minutes from each of you. What are some of the things that people asked you as you stepped off the stage? What are some of the things that you wish you had said when you're up here? What are some of the conversations you had? And we can just work down the line here.
Well, I think the majority of my conversations really were around who really is making sure to test and make sure that the food that we are eating is safe for us. And really, it's been my experience that the state really divests itself from any of that for whatever reason. And so if you're a gooey duck harvester, there's rules around it. They test where you go ahead and you harvest your gooey duck to make sure that it's safe for consumption. But if you are a person who is subsistence fishing or crabbing or shrimping or any of those things, those aren't tested and they're not looked at. And because we have such a low fish consumption rate, it's like crazy low. I don't even want to get the number wrong. You can all Google and find it. It's like low. It's really not showing really what's going on comparatively, and so it's just not done. And so there was a little bit of conversation around, maybe we could get somebody who is doing a research situation to go ahead and look at and examine that. And then I did have a question that was asked, which was, why don't I harvest anymore from that area? And the reason is the tribe tests it, and it tests hot all the time. And so, and quite frankly, how often do you have to see things being dumped out in your backyard in the water until you finally say, that's dumping exactly where I used to harvest my cockles? And you say, or, we don't get our beach asparagus in that area anymore. We don't get those things because it doesn't matter if somebody goes and tests it. When you put a bunch of poop into a place, you don't put those things back into you. But the tribe does have a couple of grants that they use to test areas that our tribal citizens are consuming food on, and they have continuously come up with shellfish poisoning and a variety of other factors that have just made my family decide that. Oh, and Ketchikan wasn't rural, and the place that we harvest was a rural area, and my mom went to the place she usually harvested all the time, and she got a $440 fine times the 4 people that went to harvest with her. So, you know, when you're getting fined for feeding your family, you find a different way to do that. Noodles instead, right?
Well, thanks. A couple things that struck me or that came up in conversations. One, I think, and we're going to talk about solutions, but that we face a lot of really intractable problems that it's difficult for us in our region to solve. Climate change, you can list them. This is not an intractable problem. This is something that we in the region can say, we're not going to allow this dirty fuel or this alternative compliance loophole of using scrubbers in our waters anymore, because we have all these other reasons of why that has negative impacts both on our health, as Gloria talked about, well, as everybody's talked about, but also on other industries, and whether that's an actual provable, you know, economic or medical impact, or with fisheries, it's certainly also even just a perception. If people no longer perceive our waters as being healthy and clean, I think it affects the tourism industry. I know it affects the commercial fishing industry, but as Gloria said, like, why isn't the cruise ship industry here saying, we realize we got to deal with this. It's not going to help us in the long term either. And I think that's because they've been able to keep it under wraps. By talking about it, by making it more publicly known, there is the momentum. And we know we can, and there's a solution. So it just makes so much sense to really take action on this.
Well, I had some questions come up about the industry's attitude and how they approach this, and whether we could convince them that they should change their ways, and what's the cost? Is it really costing them so much that they can't afford this? And how is this coming down? And I just responded that my impression is that the cruise industry manages this from a global perspective and is quite intent on keeping the most costless option in place, which is to burn heavy fuel oil and to use scrubbers, and that the other associated costs are not something that they factor into their bottom line. The cost of not addressing this pollution, as we've been discussing, these impacts are never figured in. And industry just gets to pollute the commons that we all rely on and use free of charge, essentially. And that has to come to a stop by government regulation. It's, I don't believe, going to happen voluntarily. And they've continued to advocate and assert that dilution is going to take care of it. You know, dilution is the solution to pollution. No, it is not. And the studies show that even very small concentrations of these toxins are very harmful, and they're not being diluted. That is not solving the problem. The scrubbers themselves have a pretty quick payback, and so they can make an upfront investment, and then once that's paid back, they get to have the differential between they're using the cheaper oil versus the cleaner distillate fuel. So I just look at it as a cost of doing business that they will absorb, and as they absorb other oil price increase shocks without major effects on the delivery of goods and services. And that this is just, rhetoric and delayed defense tactics to keep there from being changes that would affect their profitability.
Thanks, Kay. To some degree, it's where goes Alaska, there goes other places. So the industry wants to defend their ability to use cheap and dirty fuel in every place where they use it, because if one jurisdiction doesn't want that dirty fuel used there. Other people might, say, hey, we don't also want it used here. And it's important to think about these decisions are not about this fuel. They weren't made here in Alaska. They didn't come here and see, gosh, folks, hey, we have this idea. We'd like to use this your seawater to clean our exhaust. Will that work out for you? No, these are decisions that were made in London, and they were passed on in Washington, D.C. And so they started polluting our waters here. But ultimately, really, the decisions to do that with these cruise ships specifically, those decisions are made in Miami. They can very easily make a different decision. And if it's about a cup of coffee per person per day, this is not burning cleaner fuel and avoiding the generation of all this pollution and this additional risk from carrying additional, persistent fuel on board. It's not a deal breaker. And so we as Alaskans, we need to look around and say, what can we do? This is a very rapidly growing industry. Here next year, there are going to be 2 new large cruise ship company entrants into Alaska. Virgin Cruises and MSC, they're joining the Alaska trade. There's no sign of a reduction or a slowing, apart from COVID, of the growth of this industry. So we need to take a hard look at what kind of stewardship that we're doing here. And then I just had a question, just some confirmation about wait, we cannot use this we don't use this fuel here? And no, this is heavy fuel, residual fuel can only be used in ships with a larger than 30 liter per cylinder displacement. So it's not on the ferries. You can't buy it here. They just load it, in Seattle and Vancouver. It's not the same kind of stuff that they're using at AL&P, local power generation when they need to do onshore power generation. That's cleaner fuel. This heavy fuel oil is up to 3.5% sulfur. It's the leftover garbage from the refining process. They sell it frequently at a discount to the cost of crude oil. So they actually sell it to get rid of it. It goes away in ships, and then they burn the dirty fuel somewhere else. They don't allow that in onshore power generation. And so it's something that we should just avoid doing here.
Thank you very much to our first panel. A round of applause for them. And thank you very much for being here tonight. That was our education and information panel. And now we'd like to invite up Ephraim Froelich, who will be moderating our policy and solutions panel.
Thank you, Pat. Appreciate it. And thank you for being our MC, our local celebrity, Pat Race. Let's hear for Pat. So yeah, we're the second panel. Happy to be here. And today I have with me, starting down at the other end, Jim Powell, former UAS researcher and professor, and then President Burns, who we're not allowing off the stage today. President Burns, as you know, is the council president of the Ketchikan Indian community. And then right next to me, we have Emily Edenshaw, CEO and tribal administrator of the Ketchikan Indian community. And then you're stuck with me, Ephraim Froelich, bringing up the rear, local Juneau kid and policy advocate, and ocean policy nerd, maybe, would be that's my title. And so, yeah, we're going to start with Jim Powell there at the end. And, we're here to, like Pat said, to talk a little bit about policy and about, where we've been, where we are today, and then maybe some potential solutions of where we can head together. And so, Jim, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks. You guys can hear me okay? Yeah, good. Yeah, thanks for inviting me to be on this panel. And it's really good to see young people coming back like Ephraim and others to take up the banner as people like me retire. So good to have you guys doing this stuff. Really appreciate it. When I think of solutions for keeping our waters pristine, I think of two things. I used to work for DEC and DNR for about 27 years, so I can't get out of that much in research now. But I think of two things. The need for better information and data from which to form decisions, okay? I think it's really important that we have better information. And then making that information available to the public and to the communities and the authorities so they can make their own decisions. Additionally, violations, I don't know if you guys know, violations are continuing to happen for cruise ships not meeting basic water quality standards. There's a lack of data about the water bodies, all right, that cruise ships go through. Usually you get end of the pipe, oh, is the cruise ship doing well, okay? But who's testing the water? I think we could do a better job at that. And also the existing state program, that's DEC, has inefficiencies. We can always improve, but I think there's some glaring things that we can do. They focus on one ship at a time instead of the water bodies they're not intensely looking at, and largely doesn't monitor in a sense of cumulative impacts. And as you guys know, we got a lot more ships, and that's a problem. So my suggestion, I'm going to get right to the point here, we need to strengthen that monitoring and compliance program. Wherever we go with this, that needs to be improved. I think what we should do is modify, and you guys know what this is, probably you're Juneauites, the Ocean Ranger program that we had. Wasn't a bad idea. I think we can improve upon that. However, Governor Dunleavy vetoed the program, in effect, in 2020. He stated that the program wasn't providing a bang for the buck and was unfair to the cruise ship industry. Also, the state of Alaska continues to collect money, so it's not a funding thing. They still get money out of the passenger's fee for that program. So we have an opportunity to learn from the old program and create something better. As you might know, the Ocean Rangers is a group of state-contracted marine engineers, and that's important, assigned to stay on board ships while the ships were in Alaska waters. They served basically as a watchdog, but they did a lot of things, from engineering, sanitation, health-related operations, including record-keeping, and a lot. They didn't have enforcement power, but they were tasked to communicate those violations to the Coast Guard and DEC. So in addition, I'd like to say our understanding of pollution over the last 30, 20 years has improved dramatically, but there's a lot more ships out there. So considering my time on this panel, and I need to move along, I've got 9 elements for improving the existing program. I would suggest that we change the qualification for the inspectors and bring back the Ocean Rangers. Change that qualification from marine engineers to marine or biological degreed or engineers, and then train them. This marine engineers has been a real hard thing to do. You don't see many of those guys around. They're really hard to find. So that would help. You can train those, biological educated ones and do it that way, I think. The regulations need to be improved. They need to be updated. We haven't done that since the 1990s. The number of inspections need to keep pace with the number of ships. We're not doing that. We need to create incentives for self-reporting and compliance. There's a Scandinavian model right now that uses what's called the Environmental Port Index, and that aggregates the pollutants and they get a score. And if you get a good score, you pay less for the permit. If you get a poor score, then you pay more. So maybe we could learn from that. Then I would aggregate the inspections. You have air inspectors and you have water inspectors. You could aggregate those, have one inspector be trained in air and water. These are very specific things, but I think they could really improve the program. Publish the data. The data isn't getting published. The violations are getting published, and the non-compliance reports. We need to see the data so we can evaluate it. Another thing that's interesting is, we're next to a lot of glaciers, so we have a lot of freshwater input into the marine environment. That changes the pH and changes the temperature. Are we taking that into great consideration? That needs to take a look at. Then also lastly, and they were really program was really criticized for having the inspectors, the ocean rangers, they just stayed on the ship for a long time. They don't need to do that. You need to be on the ship when you're inspecting, then you need to get off. So there's things that you could do practically and bring that program back, because we don't have that kind of, that check right now. And I think that's where we could go, just as some solutions. Thank you.
So when I was asked to be on this panel, I really wanted to come from it from a tribal sovereignty point of view. I think that Alaskans are the smartest people in the world. I think that we have the answers in this room, and we have this answers locally grown. I'd say that, investing in those minds that are scientifically minded are absolutely true. But I'd say that the answer is in our fishermen and our people on the land, that we have people who have for generations observed their environment, and the traditional and ecological knowledge that you'll find in the Alaska Native population in this area could really make a difference. And so I'd say that one of the solutions is co-management. One of the solutions is really making sure to take that knowledge and quantify it and have conversations around it, and that we cannot look at this heavy fuel situation separately from the other things that are going on. And so I believe the solution to making sure that all of our people are well fed and able to be on this land and support their families and make sure that the cruise ship industry is no longer extractive, it really does come from not looking at the cleaner fuel situation by itself. We have to look at the food consumption rate. We have to look at the data around increased cancer rates. We have to really be paying attention to each of those things and knock them off one at a time. But really, it comes a will of each of us to speak with everybody else. I would say that the best friend that this particular cause has right now is tribal nations in Southeast. We get it, we know it, we've been talking about it for a very long time. We can see it in the difference in our black seaweed. We can see it in the different marine mammals and the things that are on the shore, all of our non-human relatives that live in the ocean. And so having those conversations, not just, I agree, we need to return that program in there, but I think that in order to find this solution, working with the tribal nations that are here is really going to be the way forward, because we've been paying attention to that same beach for thousands of years. For thousands of years, we have stories about when the water is changed, how it looks like, what it happens, why is that rock now a certain kind of color, what has changed in that environment, what have we noticed is being put in that environment, what does the smell look like? And so I think that you have to acknowledge that traditional and ecological knowledge that comes from people who have loved and taken care of a place since time immemorial, and that has to be part of the solution. And as a tribe, we have a unique relationship as per the Constitution with the federal government, and making sure that we're part of that conversation, not as an afterthought, but on the table next to everybody in that fight will make a difference.
Can you hear me? Well, thank you. She's my boss. I just have to say that, but I'll start off by saying hello everyone. My English name is Emily Eden Shaw, and I have the honor to serve as the Tribal Administrator and CEO of Ketchikan Indian Community. I've been there for about 6 weeks. Prior to that, I was the President and CEO of the Alaska Native Heritage Center. I will say who I am, though. I'm also a Raven Thunderbird. I was adopted in Old Massac Haida Gwaii, but I would say my most important hat that I wear is I am a mother to 5 beautiful children, 6 if you count my husband. One of my sons, though, is a fisherman, and so I come into this space not only as a community advocate and as a community leader, but as a mother and an auntie. And I want to lift up my nephew who's in the audience, Tristan, if you want to raise your hand. Thank you for being here, Tristan. I want to say thank you to Grant for inviting me to be on this panel. I am so passionate about cultural tourism. And when we start talking about the cruise line industry, we can all agree that it's a microcosm of a much larger ecosystem in Alaska. And the reason why I said yes to be on this panel is because one of the main solutions, and if you've been to some of my other panels that I've been part of, is that the number one way to affect change and to make change is not only to educate yourself, but to use your voice. Everyone who is in this room and everyone listening online, your voice matters. It doesn't matter what title you have. It doesn't matter if you live in rural Alaska, in urban Alaska, you can make change. And I wanted to start off with a quick story, and I know I only have 4 minutes, but for those of you who know me know that I used to serve on the state tourism board. Many people also know I got voted off that board because I didn't take no for an answer. We did a lot of work. I would say a lot of the other Native leaders that were part of the tourism industry. And I just want to say, most tourism panels that I'm on, they don't even have Indigenous representation, and this panel has 2. And so I just really want to say thank you to the organizers of this event, because I've seen that. I've seen that time and time again where I'm the only brown person in the room or on the panel, and I love that we have 2 people. But the story I wanted to share is when I started doing this work, I remember going to the State Tourism Board meeting, and this is before I was on the board, and I remember asking the board, do you all support cultural tourism? And I would say in this instance, I think we could all maybe fill in that question with, do you support cleaner fuels? And I want to invite you all to kind of imagine asking them that question. Every single board member looked at me and said, yes, we support cultural tourism. And my follow-up question to them is, how come you don't spend 1 penny on it? Because what I've learned is that a moral ethic of an organization is its budget. And if they're not funding it, the message you're sending to me is that you don't care. You don't care. And I'm not going to buy into a narrative that we're doing enough. If you're doing enough, then we wouldn't be here trying to educate us. And I will say, in this last hour alone, I have learned more about clean fuels than I have in my entire life. So I just want to say thank you to the other panelists. But to Gloria's point earlier, President Burns, why aren't they here? Why aren't they leading this? And I think that's a really critical question that we need to be asking them. To the former panelists that shared the ASME, the reality of the narrative that's being pushed out, it is our responsibility to hold the industry accountable. For those of you who do not know the way that tourism and seafood marketing is structured in Alaska, at one point it was about, and depending on, I don't want to say depending on the website, but it was about 25 years ago when the industry was handed over. It used to be under the state of Alaska, and now it's run by the industry. So you have 2 different boards that are receiving state dollars, but it's run by the industry. And the reason why I bring that up is because every person in this room and those listening online, you need to be in those rooms. You need to be putting your name to run on the board, to be more informed, to use your voice even when it's shaky. Because at the end of the day, the way that those boards are funded primarily is with state dollars. So I just want to end on, being able to go to those spaces, if no one is bringing it up and asking these hard questions, we have the responsibility. And that's something that I've realized working at KIC and at the Heritage Center. I accept my responsibility. And if I'm saying something that makes you feel uncomfortable, then it's maybe something within the industry or within you that is making you feel uncomfortable. So with that, I'll stop talking. I'm happy to answer any questions, but know that solutions really, really, and I've shared this time and time again, use your voice, educate yourself, and if you want, I shared this with my fellow panelists. I am very proud to share, I'm about to get my doctorate in Indigenous Studies, and one of the academic journals that I wrote with Ben Jasek tied the tourism industry to boarding schools in Alaska. So I want to end on this: this didn't just happen. The erasure, the lack of partnership, the lack of reaching out to not only indigenous communities, but also non-native communities. There is a history of this within our state. And as Alaskans, we need to educate ourselves, and we need to be holding these industries as well as businesses accountable. So thank you.
Thank you. So the first thing I've learned is that Pat's bell comes at you fast. We gotta check his clock. That's really fast. But I'm here to talk a little bit about the policy framework and talk about the international. We've heard a little bit about the international level, federal, and what's going on at different state levels and local levels. But first, what have we heard about heavy fuel oil so far, right? It's dirty. It's climate threatening, it's ecosystem damaging. What are the risks that it poses, excuse me. I mean, it poses significant spill risk, right? It poses risks to our communities via air quality, water quality, ecosystem health, human health. So the list goes on, right? And so what is being done? Aaron touched on it briefly earlier. At the international level, the IMO, the International Maritime Organization, which is a UN agency, in 2024 implemented an HFO ban in the Arctic. But that ban doesn't really go into effect for about 3/4 of ocean-going ships in the Arctic until 2029. So that's kind of coming at some point soon, soonish. But the Arctic is, a place worth protecting, and now the IMO has asserted that, right? And as you look around other Arctic nations, right, Norway has a ban on HFO carriage around Svalbard, which is a region they consider precious and to be protected, right? We heard Aaron mention other HFO regulations in places like Denmark and Sweden. So, there's this move to protect areas that are worth protecting. And, in my opinion, Alaska, our home, our waters, probably fall into that category in most of your opinion. I think in our state, regulatory bodies' opinions, I think even potentially in our governor's opinion, right? We should protect Alaska in the same way that other places are being protected. And so, like Aaron mentioned also, that the HFO decisions and fuel decisions for the cruise industry were made in London. This is where the IMO meets. They were trickled through Washington D.C. And there's now federal rules that you can use HFO if you use scrubbers, right? But like was already outlined by our other panel, scrubbers also have their own risks, right? And so even in places in Alaska, and I think that was also mentioned earlier, there are HFO bans, and there's one in our neighboring little area of Glacier Bay, right? And so Glacier Bay is worth protecting. And again, I think the rest of Alaska is too. It was in 2008 at the state level, California passed the first state level ban on HFO, right? And so it requires cleaner fuels within 24 nautical miles of California's coast. It prohibits all heavy fuel oil in state waters, and it's one of the strictest state level bans, or regional level bans anywhere in the world. And since California, it's inspired other things to happen, right? In 2022, Hawaii had implemented a requirement for cleaner fuels in its ports, and then you see that there's a trickle-down effect, right? In Washington State, just this past year, there was an effort, 2 bills, one in the House and one in the Senate, to begin the process of creating a state-level HFO ban in Washington state waters. And if you look around the West Coast corridor, right, our neighbors, you're seeing HFO bans in different ports, right? There's West Coast ports like Seattle, Vancouver, Prince Rupert. They prohibit scrubber wastewater discharge in their ports. And there's this move to actually start reacting at a state and local level, which is exciting, right? That's the leadership that's needed. And California has already seen results. And that case was litigated, right? The California case, they mandated it, and it was affirmed that they have the legal authority to have those regulations, right? The state of Alaska has full legal authority to regulate fuel types that are used within its waters, including restricting and burning of heavy fuel oil. The restricting of burning, excuse me. So there's no federal statute that preempts Alaska from adopting shipping fuel regulations. And again, it was affirmed by the Ninth Circuit Court, its decision in the Pacific Merchant Shipping Association. But we're lagging behind, and as I've now reiterated a couple times, right? Alaska's worth protecting, our waters are worth protecting, our livelihoods, our ecosystems, our traditions and ways of life are worth protecting. I told you that, bell man. And so, yeah, I just want to end on, talking about there are layers of some levels of protections, but there's gaps, right? There's more that we need to do. And my goal here, right, isn't to, and I think our goal isn't to demonize industry. And I think ideally we would go hand in hand together towards a solution, right? I think there's an invitation, an open invitation to say, come with us, let's make the best decisions that are economically feasible, as there's a new economic report coming out. It's feasible. It's a couple bucks a day per passenger. That the cost of a cruise ship ticket is significant. A couple bucks on the per day for that week you're on the ship or whatever is not. I don't think going to turn too many passengers away. But we are talking here about heavy fuel oil and the risks and the damage that it causes. And there are solutions. Let's go and find them together. So, thank you.
Great. Now, we are going to invite people to ask questions of the panel here. I'm not going to rush you to get up there, but I'll ask a question to get things started. And if you could mosey on over there with your own questions, that'd be great. From a policy and implementation standpoint, and this is for any of the panelists here that want to jump in, what is like your best hope for how industry could engage here on this issue?
Just off the top of my head, I'd like to see more data. No matter which way it goes, I don't think there's enough of that. We're not seeing things that we can. And if you look at the history of this, that was the first thing we had to do early in the 2000s, is to ask for permission to right to know. We couldn't even get it. And actually, I remember talking to some DEC folks, and I said, it's easier to deal with the oil companies back then than it was the cruise ships. The culture has changed. They do want to work with us, but we need to do more. So more data, and I don't think there's any reason why we couldn't, those bans represent a different approach to regulating, and that is that they are in a precautionary principle, and that is, let's just get rid of, let's ban it, because we think in the future we're being precautionary. Usually the United States doesn't do that. It's very litigious. And I think that precautionary approach is much better, and there's reasons for it. Anyway.
Want to answer that?
You want to repeat the question?
Yeah, I was just trying to imagine, like, what is the best possible scenario for industry engagement here? Like, what would you love to see happen?
For me, I would love to see industry want to be operating in Alaska waters in 7 generations, and I would want them to have a 7-generation strategy. I want them to say, we're putting into these communities that we're taking from in a way that's reciprocal and not extractive, and part of that strategy is to make sure that we not just leave Alaska with no harm, but we leave it better. And they create policies and ways of being and acting around that so that we can have our children's children look back at this and say that together we created a new ecosystem that left everybody whole.
Great. And we've got a couple people at the microphone. Would you like to ask your question?
Sure. Is this working? Is that working? Yeah, okay. So this might be for Ephraim. Do local entities like the City Bureau of Juneau or Ketchikan Borough have the authority to regulate wastewater discharge from scrubbers? Or is it state level, or at what level can it be regulated?
We have, and Jim might be able to correct me if I'm wrong, but we have the ability to regulate when they're tied up at port here in Juneau. And then, after that, they're in state waters, right? When you leave our port, you're in state waters. And so that would be a state water regulation up to, again, off the top of my head, I'm blanking, but up to multiple nautical miles. 3 nautical miles, Linda? Yeah, thank you. So the state would have then authority out, once you leave port, out to 3 nautical miles. So yeah, and I don't know, Jim, if you have...
How do we create a system beyond fines and financial incentives? It seems with such a huge international industry, a few $100,000 a season paid by these cruise ship companies, it's nothing to them. And sometimes it might seem easier or cheaper for them to just continue infringing and create these violations than to actually make changes. So how can we move beyond or away from this financial incentive system?
I can go ahead and maybe share some of my thoughts. I think for it to truly be sustainable, and I will say as we look to 7 generations that we've shared, I think it has to be created truly in partnership with the community where, and I'm a firm believer, we have to take different actions if we want different results. And the reality is that every single person in this room, we have inherited an industry. That's the reality of it. But we also have the power to change that industry. And one thing I know is that when we start talking about policy and partnership and solutions, I've been on these mega big cruise ships and, extending beyond fuels, why is it okay for them to sell made in China totem poles? Why don't we have interpreters on cruise ships? It goes beyond just our environment. I think it truly has to be rooted in partnership, and those solutions, those ideas have to come from the community, not only the Native community, but also the non-Native community, and it has to be reflective of those voices. So I hope I answered that.
And I'd just like to add, that's great, and that, there's also the optics issue, right? And a lot of these violations and fines are just paid in the dark, sort of, right? The violations are received in the dark, paid in the dark. Kudos to SEACC and K2, who recently had, SEACC researched and K2 published a bunch of the violations data. But I didn't know that stuff was happening, right? How would you know unless you're on the EPA website combing through violations data, which, I'm sure that person might exist, but there's not many of us, right? And so, elevating and amplifying the issue, I think, is one way forward there.
Hi, I'm Alex at K2. I'm wondering if there are any cruise ship industry representatives in the room here today. Okay.
You are.
I'm wondering if any were invited.
Yes.
Okay, can you tell me who you guys invited?
I think I'd feel weird about calling out specific people.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
A couple things come to mind. I'm really appreciating tonight the use of the term extractive, because I really feel that's hitting the nail on the head. I don't know if this is still a situation, but a friend of mine opened a local business here in Juneau about 20 years ago, and I learned through her, at least at that time, if she didn't pay a tithe to the cruise ship industry, she was not listed as a place worth visiting. So when we're talking about trying to collaborate and be partners with these people, and again, this was a while ago, but their mindset is so extractive. And if you don't give me money, I'm going to sort of give my tourists the impression that you're not a business that's reputable. So I really like the idea of the collaboration, and that seems like that's going to be a steep hill to go up. But I'm glad to hear that we want to go that way. The main question that I had. If I understood correctly, getting a statewide ban would require our legislature passing things, which sounds like another steep climb. Is this something the city and borough, the city assembly, could say, we're going to put a ban on CBJ, whatever biggest jurisdiction the assembly can do? Is that something they could do, and is that a big climb? It seems like maybe a little more reachable.
I mean, what I would just briefly say is I think even before that, the city and borough of Juneau could enter into negotiations and conversations with industry from a place of, which I think Juneau should have, a position of power, and say, hey, we'd like to come and negotiate with you and talk to you about an agreement, right? There's things before you have to legislate something, right? There's memoranda of understanding, there's statements of cooperation, there's other ways to move forward and to try to move forward. And if that doesn't work, then I think you could have a port ban. But I think there's multiple steps that the city should or could embark on before that. But
Well, I was just going to say that, and it really speaks to, the change that we want to see. It's not just within, say, for example, CLIA or ATIA with the state. I think, to your point, we have cruise ships not only going to Anchorage, but now on Alaska up to Nome. This isn't just Southeast Alaska. And I will just say that, it's critical that we're having these conversations all across Alaska. It's a statewide issue. And I think we need to be looking at it not only from a local level, but you also have to look at from a destination marketing perspective as well. Follow the funding. It's not just from the operator, it's also from the entities that are connected to the industry. And, I know you don't feel comfortable calling them out, but I will call them out, and I will say that with love and respect, because again, we need to hold them accountable, because at the end of the day, what we're inheriting today, our kids are gonna inherit, and I don't want my kids to be having the same conversations that we're having today, period. And so I will end by saying that I believe that true change not only starts at the local level, but we also have to be looking at the entities like Visit Anchorage, like Visit Ketchikan, like the other destination marketing organizations that do work with CLIA and ATIA and ASME, and get on those boards. And why aren't they educating and having panels about this? Because it's run by industry. Am I wrong? I'm not wrong. So thank you for asking that question, and I'll stop talking.
Thank you.
So I'm a total grassroots kind of person that never likes to write my own letter, but I still think that, we have 2 new cruise ship lines coming to Alaska. Also, through these mechanisms, why aren't we asking who the first cruise ship line is going to be to say that they are running with no heavy fuels? Yeah. And support that cruise ship industry. I think that money is where, money talks, right? And so you have to look at the money, you have to look at all those causalities, all those places, I guess all those bus stops along the line, and have that conversation. But I would love to be able to say one of these 2 new cruise ship companies that are coming in here is able to say to us, we come and we don't use heavy fuel in your waters. I would love them even more to say, we just don't use heavy fuel at all.
Speak it into existence.
All right, we have time for, I see 2 questions there. We'll cut it off there. So if you could ask your questions. Great.
Thank you. I guess kind of thinking back to the beginning of the first panel, I think it was part of one of Mr. Brakel's slides, showed all of the different countries and ports that have enacted bans or restrictions. I'm wondering if we've noticed if that has had any sort of effect on industry in their behavior. If not, is there a critical number of ports and communities that you think would be helpful, or maybe another approach? I'm just curious to see what your answer might be on that.
I mean, I'll briefly say, since Hawaii's 2022 ban, we've seen the industry grow significantly in Hawaii, right? And so it has not damaged the growth of the cruise industry in Hawaii, which has grown from 2022 to 2025, not exponentially, but it's been a big growth, right? And so we have not seen that ban on heavy fuel oil carriage in Hawaii state waters have a very negative effect at all. And it's been positive there. California, that's the same thing, even though they've had longer time to adjust to that, but Hawaii is our most recent example. I can't speak to the port ban specifically. You might want to pull Aaron aside afterwards because he's a little smarter than I am, but I'll pass it down if anybody else wants to.
I don't think there's any evidence out there or examples where ships have decided not to go into that water because there's a ban. They are adjusting, and it does take time, and they are working on it. I mean, the cruise ships, to their credit, the technology continues to change. That's how we got the scrubbers, good or bad on that. It's not a good thing. But, I mean, they are changing. So, anyway, I don't think there's any evidence out there. I mean, I remember I was sitting in an assembly meeting, I don't know, years ago, and there was a guy that was the head of CLIA at the time. He said, we were giving him a hard time, we were giving him hard questions, and he said, well, if you don't like it, we're not going to come. They're coming, So yeah, I don't think, and they've done the analysis of cost. I mean, it's not a lot of cost, and the good thing here, I think is really good, is that we're banding together. And the ships not only go here, as you guys know, they go to other ports. So there's a calculus to this all. So we need to band together. And actually, our tourism manager, I was going to mention, they've started a new statewide program. It's called Alaska Port Partners, I think. And that's to get people together so we have the power. There's a power, as you know, imbalance between billion-dollar industries and us in Juneau or the small ports around communities. So that has helped too. So the calculus is changing rapidly, but they're changing too.
Thank you.
And if I could respond to that too, before I started at KIC, I've worked with communities all over the state, really wanting to stand up their cultural tourism programs. And I will say, my love language is cultural tourism because I see the power that one job makes. But what a lot of these communities that, rural communities that are now welcoming cruise ships, they're struggling with just getting a schedule to figure out when they're going to arrive. So there's a lot of work that needs to happen. And if anyone from industry is listening online, I've been saying this for years, that it needs, not only do they need to be reaching out to those communities in rural Alaska, they also need to be okay if those communities don't want you to come, period. And they aren't okay with that. A lot of them aren't. And I've been beating that drum for many years because I've been hearing from communities all over the state. Some communities want cruise ships and some don't. And so I just wanted to add that a lot of rural communities right now, some can't even get a basic cruise ship schedule. And many of these communities don't even have destination marketing organizations like Visit Anchorage or Visit Juneau or Visit Ketchikan. So I just wanted to provide that context that it's very different in rural Alaska. And again, industry needs to be okay. If the community says that they don't want them to come, they need to listen to those communities.
I'm Richard Steele. I wanted to know if this is a technical question. Can you just put the better quality oil in the ship, or do you have to put new equipment on there? Can you put it directly in, or does it take a lot of investment to prepare it for better oil?
Jim can probably answer this better than I can, but currently these ships are burning both heavy fuel oil when they can, and they are also burning marine diesel, and so they have the ability now to burn what we would call cleaner fuel.
And there's a whole, I don't know the percentages, but there's many ships that are going to LNG. So we're in the middle of this kind of transition of fuels and technology, but they can switch fuels from lighter, from the bunker C to the lighter fuel. They can if they want to.
And can you make the better quality fuel from the bunker oil they're using?
I don't think on board you can make that.
No, I mean at the refinery.
I think that's where it comes from.
Because they're putting the bunker fuel is like waste oil.
Yeah.
But can the waste oil be made into higher quality oil?
I don't know.
Not that I'm aware of, Aaron.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think they've tried to figure out what to make with the bunker fuel, and they haven't been able to find a solution.
Yeah, if there's someone in the audience, we are going to break after this, and so maybe someone can identify, and if you have the answer to that question, that'd be great. Just very briefly, if anyone wants to make a closing statement, just keep it kind of tight. What we'd like to do is break and have an opportunity for more discussion in the room here. We'll go ahead and go down the line here. Jim, if you have anything that you want to end on?
No, just thanks for inviting me, and I learned a lot tonight from everybody. Thanks.
I'd say that tribes across Southeast Alaska have been paying attention to this for a very long time, and it's good to see that everybody is ready to become educated and that collectively we might stand together to make a change for our state. We all have a responsibility to leave this place in the same way or better, that to take care of it. And so I'm appreciative to the knowledge that's in this room and the collective will that is being created in both this space personally and online. And want to thank the Taku Kwan and the Kwan people once again.
I just want to say thank you for allowing me to be here tonight. For those listening online, I get really fired up, and I'm really passionate about this topic because, as I shared earlier, I see the difference that one job can make, and I believe that we can have a brighter future. And I know that sounds really fluffy, but I lead from my heart, and I believe that if we speak from a place of good and positive, we are stronger together. And I used to say that all the time when I was on the state tourism board. I will also say, as tribal administrator and CEO of KIC, my dream is to have more canoes in the water than cruise ships. And I hope and I pray that cruise ships want that too. And it's going to take a lot of work for us to get there. And I'm committed to coming to the table, but they have to show up, especially in spaces like tonight. So thank you again for having me. Please reach out. And I just want to lift our elected officials up, our tribal leaders up, and please be safe tonight.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate everything everybody else has said before me. I want to thank Senator Keel for being here today, and Assemblyman Kelly. It's great to have our public officials engaged. I've learned a ton here today as well. And I really appreciate, I've seen people from SEACC, Ketchikan, all over Southeast here today. It's really special. So thank you all for making the trip down here. Thank you to all the panelists, and thank you to SEACC for blazing a path forward on this work, but also to all the partners here. This is really special, all the way down from Anchorage, and it's great. And I do think there's a pathway together. There's a cleaner fuel future together that we can navigate, and along with industry. We're going to have these conversations. So there is a pathway together. I think we can make something happen, and I'm excited to do this work hand in hand. So thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you.